They don't want you to learn the truth. You'll be taught about freedom. You'll be taught about the founding fathers. You'll hear stories of independence, bravery, and the birth of a nation built on ideals. But there are parts of the story that are consistently softened, minimized, or completely ignored. The whippings, the burnings, the mutilations, the stolen children, the terror that helped build America's wealth. Because if the full story were told, honestly and without filters, it would force a difficult realization. The system wasn't simply flawed, it was designed. And that is why conversations about Black history often become uncomfortable when they move beyond surface-level narratives. Consider what most people learn in school. Names like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson are familiar. Events like the American Revolution are studied in detail. The idea of liberty is celebrated as a defining national principle. But what is often missing is just as important as what is included. Why is there so little emphasis on the enslaved individuals who lived and died under these same founding figures? Why do lessons on independence rarely explore the millions who were denied it entirely? This is not random. It is not a simple oversight. It is selective storytelling. History is not only shaped by what is recorded, it is shaped by what is emphasized and what is left out. And those choices reflect power. In many educational settings, slavery is described in softened terms: forced labor, plantation life, or workers. But those words fail to capture the reality. Slavery in the United States functioned as a system of organized, legally sanctioned violence. Enslaved people were subjected to whippings so severe they caused permanent physical damage, branding with hot irons, physical mutilation as punishment for resistance or escape attempts, psychological terror, including forced witnessing of violence against loved ones. These acts were not isolated incidents. They were embedded within legal frameworks known as slave codes, which permitted and protected such brutality. Violence was not incidental to slavery, it was foundational to it. Fear maintained control, pain enforced obedience, terror sustained the system. Slavery was not only a moral atrocity, it was also a central pillar of the American economy. By the 19th century, enslaved people were among the most valuable assets in the country. Their monetary value exceeded that of many major industries, including railroads and manufacturing. Entire economic systems depended on their exploitation: cotton production in the Deep South, tobacco cultivation, and sugar plantations. This was not accidental. It was calculated. Methods of punishment were often used deliberately to increase productivity. Violence became a tool of economic efficiency. Understanding this reveals a critical truth. Slavery was not just cruelty, it was capitalism structured around human suffering. Another often overlooked aspect of this history is that violence was not always hidden. It was frequently public. Lynchings, particularly in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, were carried out in front of crowds. These acts were not only intended to punish individuals, but to send a broader message of intimidation and control. Communities gathered, photographs were taken. These images were sometimes turned into postcards. This normalization of violence reinforced a social order built on fear. Yet, many educational narratives avoid confronting this reality in depth, leaving a significant gap in public understanding. One of the most devastating aspects of slavery was the systematic destruction of families. Enslaved individuals had no legal rights to maintain family bonds. Children could be sold away from parents at any moment. Spouses could be separated indefinitely. These separations were not rare, they were routine. For enslaved women, the situation was even more complex and painful. They faced exploitation and abuse, and their children were often born into the same system of bondage, ensuring the continuation of slavery across generations. This was not only a system of labor, it was a system designed to control and reproduce itself. The end of slavery in 1865 did not mark the end of systemic violence or inequality. Instead, new systems emerged that continued many of the same patterns under different names. Black codes restricted freedoms. Convict leasing allowed for the re-enslavement of thousands through the criminal justice system. Jim Crow laws enforced racial segregation and inequality. Convict leasing, in particular, exposed individuals, often arrested on minor or fabricated charges, to extremely harsh labor conditions. Because they were leased rather than owned, there was little incentive to ensure their survival. These systems demonstrate that the structures of control did not disappear, they adapted. The question remains, why are these aspects of history not emphasized more strongly? One reason is that a fuller understanding of this history challenges simplified national narratives. It complicates the idea that inequality is merely accidental or recent. It raises deeper questions about how historical systems have shaped present-day realities. It forces a reconsideration of long-held assumptions. History is not only about the past, it informs how we understand the present. And when parts of that history are minimized, the result is an incomplete picture. Engaging with this history is not about assigning guilt, it is about gaining clarity. When history is presented without its full context, it becomes easier to misunderstand current social and economic conditions. But when history is examined honestly, it allows for more informed discussions and a deeper understanding of how societies evolve. Acknowledging difficult truths is not about division, it is about awareness. Words like freedom, progress, and the American dream are powerful, but they carry different meanings depending on perspective. To fully understand these ideas, it is necessary to ask, freedom for whom? Progress at what cost? Whose experiences are included and whose are left out? The reality is that the harsher aspects of history, the violence, the suffering, the systemic control, are part of the story whether they are emphasized or not. Ignoring them does not erase them. It only limits understanding. And without a full understanding of the past, it becomes much harder to navigate the present or shape a more informed future. To fully understand why the most brutal aspects of history are often minimized, we have to go deeper than events. We have to examine intent. Slavery was not just a physical system, it was psychological. Enslaved people were not only controlled through violence, but through strategies designed to break identity, autonomy, and resistance. Names were stripped, languages were erased, cultural connections were intentionally disrupted. In many cases, enslaved individuals were deliberately separated from others who spoke the same language or came from the same region in Africa. This was not accidental. It was a calculated effort to prevent unity, because unity creates resistance, and resistance threatens systems built on control. Even the smallest acts of independence, learning to read, practicing spiritual traditions, maintaining family bonds, were seen as dangerous. Why? Because knowledge creates awareness. Awareness creates questioning, and questioning challenges power. After slavery, control did not disappear. It shifted into new forms, many of which still echo today. One of the most powerful tools used was criminalization. Laws were created that targeted everyday behavior. Vagrancy laws made it illegal to be unemployed. Loitering laws restricted movement. Minor infractions led to severe punishments. These laws disproportionately affected Black communities, creating a pipeline from freedom back into forced labor. Convict leasing allowed states and private businesses to profit from this system. Individuals could be arrested under vague or false charges and then leased out to work under brutal conditions. In many cases, they faced treatment as harsh or harsher than during slavery. This wasn't a failure of the system. It was a continuation of it. Education shapes memory, and memory shapes identity. So what happens when education is incomplete? When textbooks focus on progress but avoid pain? When they highlight achievement but overlook exploitation? When they celebrate freedom but minimize those who were denied it? A distorted narrative is created. Students grow up with a version of history that feels coherent but is missing critical pieces. And without those pieces, it becomes difficult to understand present-day inequalities. This is not about adding negativity to history. It is about restoring accuracy. Because a story that excludes suffering is not a complete story. It is a curated one. The way history is described matters. Words shape understanding. Consider the difference between these phrases: slaves versus enslaved people, workers versus forced laborers, servants versus human beings held in bondage. Language can either humanize or distance. When harsh realities are softened through language, the emotional weight of history is reduced. And when the emotional weight is reduced, the urgency to understand or confront the past is also reduced. This is how systems of harm can become abstract instead of personal. But history was never abstract to those who lived it. Another critical element often underemphasized is resistance. Despite overwhelming oppression, enslaved people resisted in countless ways, escaping bondage, sometimes over hundreds of miles, organizing revolts, preserving culture through music, storytelling, and spirituality. Teaching one another in secret resistance was constant. It took courage to run. It took courage to learn. It took courage to hope. Figures like Harriet Tubman and Nat Turner are sometimes mentioned, but often without fully exploring the risks they took or the broader context of resistance movements. Because when resistance is fully understood, it highlights something powerful. Oppression was never accepted quietly. It was challenged again and again. History does not stay in the past. Its effects move forward through generations. Wealth, opportunity, education, and access are all shaped by historical conditions. When millions of people are denied the ability to build wealth for generations, when families are repeatedly disrupted, when access to education is restricted, the impact does not disappear overnight. It accumulates. Understanding this does not require blame. It requires recognition. Because without recognizing how the past shapes the present, it becomes easy to misinterpret current realities. Why do conversations about these topics often feel tense? Because they challenge deeply held narratives. They ask people to reconsider what they thought they knew. They introduce complexity into stories that are often presented as simple. And discomfort, while difficult, is not necessarily negative. It can be a sign of growth. It can indicate that new perspectives are being considered. But only if the conversation continues. When history is explored honestly and completely, something shifts. The conversation becomes more informed. The context becomes clearer. The ability to understand different perspectives increases. This does not erase progress. It does not diminish achievements. Instead, it provides a fuller picture, one that includes both the ideals a nation strives for and the realities it has faced. A nation's history is rarely simple. It contains moments of progress and moments of pain. Recognizing both is essential, because ignoring one side does not strengthen a narrative, it weakens it. A complete understanding of history does not divide people. It informs them, and informed people are better equipped to engage in meaningful conversations about the present and the future. The whippings happened, the burnings happened, the mutilations happened. So did the resistance. So did the survival. So did the resilience. The question is not whether these things are part of history. The question is whether they are acknowledged as central to it or pushed to the margins, because the stories that are emphasized shape how we see the world, and the stories that are ignored shape what we fail to see. If we want a deeper understanding of society, we must be willing to engage with its full history, not just the parts that are comfortable. Because the full story is not just about the past, it is about how we understand the present and how we shape what comes next.